episode of Unloaded and Uncovered with me, your host, Magda Desir. Please do not forget to subscribe, like, and follow my YouTube page. All of my podcast interviews will be under the tab podcast on my YouTube page. Do not forget to follow us at Unloaded and Uncovered Podcast on Instagram. Definitely find and follow the page on Facebook, Unloaded and Uncovered. Now that we got all that out the way, ladies and gentlemen, I have another guest. I always say I have a very special guest, but I think everyone is special that has, so far have come on my podcast and I've talked to. But today we have Cheryl. Cheryl, can you let everyone know who you are?
Well, I'll give you a really broad brush stroke here.
Okay.
For, probably many years, because I'm quasi-retired right now. I was an instructional designer and what I call the performance solution specialist, which meant I worked as a consultant in corporate America, in creating, educational programs. I did work some with K through 12 and some in higher ed, but primarily in corporate America, creating learning solutions, hopefully learning solutions that actually move the needle and help people perform better in their jobs. But, some of it not. And then as I've retired, I've moved more into focusing almost exclusively on constitutional educational courses and providing those to people who want to learn more about our Constitution and we're not a democracy. I don't want to save democracy. We are a republic, and I want to save our republic.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, how did you get into instructional design, right? Instruction design? Is that what it's called? How did you get into that?
Now, that's a very interesting story.
Okay.
Prior to getting married and having kids, I was a flight attendant. And once I had kids, I was married to a person who was blind. And at the time, it was when computers were first coming out and when with computers came voice recognition and screen reading technology so that people with visual impairments and mobility impairments could use computers. Yeah. And we started this business, and all my flight attendant experience was totally relevant to this, right?
Yes.
Not at all.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah. Flight attendants aren't prepared to do this. And so when we started this business, I had never even touched a computer. And, but there were a lot of other people who hadn't touched computers either. So I always tell people I was one chapter ahead of my students, and I started training people with disabilities to use computers. And there were no tutorials, no instruction manuals, no anything like that. And so I ended up writing a lot of my own materials, and I learned a lot because I had clients my main focus was on clients with disabilities, but because voice recognition technology was new, doctors and lawyers were like, oh, let's do this so that we don't have to have transcriptionists. We'll just talk to the computer and it'll transcribe our voice and everything. So I had people that either had just physical disabilities, learning disabilities, and then all the way up to doctors and lawyers. And so it was a real broad range of clients, and I couldn't use the same materials for my doctors and lawyers that I was using for my people with learning disabilities because it just didn't work. So that's where I really started studying how do people learn, what works in different environments and that type of thing. And we did that for a long time, but I didn't have a degree because I was a flight attendant. I didn't go to college. Well, I shouldn't say that. I went to 1 year of college, and that was political science, by the way, which had nothing to do with being a flight attendant or nothing to do with being an instructional designer. And then and so I went back to college when I was like 40 something. And I realized at that point that was a complete and total waste of my money because I could teach the classes, that I was supposed to be learning. And instead I was like teaching the classes. I'm paying to teach, It just didn't make sense to me. So I got on this soapbox of we need to improve the quality of education and how we do education. And that became my big thing. And in probably 2010, 2011, I really zeroed in on the concept that there are 5 key things that students coming out of either K through 12 and especially higher ed didn't have that the workforce needed in general. And they were like creativity, communication, problem solving, team building, resilience, those types of things. And it was interesting because at the time, everybody was just kind of like, don't worry about that. They have these IT skills, or they have, whatever they were trained in college. They don't need these skills. And now employers are screaming. They're like, this is what we need. We're tired of hiring students out of college that I can teach them how to, do the technical aspect of their job, but I can't teach them how to be creative or problem solve or, all that kind of thing. And I can't teach them to be resilient. So where does this leave us?
Interesting. Do you see that as a gap right now? Because I know I do a lot of social listening, and I do a lot of scrolling, aimlessly scrolling on social media. And I've came across a couple of teachers that discussed and talked about how a lot of these kids do not know how to read, do not know how to spell, or their level. They might be like a 9th grader and are reading and spelling at like a 2nd grade or 3rd grade level. Do you think that is, with what you just described and what you just said, do you think that will be a major issue moving forward with our children?
I think there are 2 different camps.
Okay.
And unfortunately, and I really mean this, unfortunately, our schools are failing our kids on so many levels. It isn't even funny.
It's not.
I mean, it is scary. And my kids are all grown, and I have some grandkids and things like that. And when my kids were young, everybody's like, oh, get them into preschool. You got to get them a head start. They have to learn to read before they're even in kindergarten. I'm like, no. I'm not buying that. So what I did instead as a mother, I chose to say, I'm not going to teach my kids to read before they go to school. I'm not going to teach my kids the alphabet or to math or science or whatever. I'm like, no, I'm going to teach them to be curious. I'm going to give them opportunities to be creative. I'm going to give them opportunities to do these things. And we're going to go to children's museums, and we are going to go explore nature, and we are going to go, because my thought was, if I can stimulate an interest in learning, when they go to school, they're going to learn. Okay. So
Yeah.
you've got this camp of parents, and through no fault of their own. I'm not faulting parents, especially ones in, the inner cities and places like that, where they're so busy working, they don't have time. And so they send their kids to these preschools, and, there's good preschools out there. I'm not knocking preschools, but, they're put in a structured, formal environment where they have some free play, they have some things, but mostly everything is structured. So from the moment a kid gets up in the morning, it's like, okay, hurry. We got to get everything done. We got to get off to school so that I can get off to work. And then as soon as work's over, or even before work's over, somebody's hauling your kid off to some activity after school, a organized, formal activity. And I was listening to a guy, it was The Indoctrinated Brain is the name of the book. I really liked it. And he said what I said a long time ago. Kids need free play. You want to know where creativity, problem solving, all these things are learned? They're learned in free play when kids are very young. I'm old enough, fortunately, that when I was young, I didn't go to preschool. And even when I went to school, when I came home, I played with the neighborhood kids. I didn't participate in organized activities till I was, almost in high school. But we organized our own basketball games. We organized our own, whatever we were doing, kind of thing. And all kids did. That's just what we did. A bunch of kids would get together and we'd make up our own rules and we would enforce our own rules and we would, and all those things, allow kids to learn these types of skills. And my mom, to her credit, would be like, okay, you want to learn to make brownies? Well, guess what? Here's a recipe. Here's the kitchen. Here's what you need. And I can tell you, many of the things I made turned out horrible, but I learned. It's like, why did my brownies or my cake or whatever fall? Carrot cake was always one I remember trying so hard to make, and I could never make it, stay up. It always fell in the middle. And my mom, to her credit, was like, well, you need to figure this out. What made it fall? Somebody could have come along and told me what made it fall. But she said, no, that's not how you learn. You don't learn by people telling you things. You learn, it wasn't like she just left me in the kitchen. She kind of guided me and asked me questions and made me think through things. But kids don't have that opportunity anymore. Parents don't have time. They're too busy working.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true. You do see a lot of parents saying that, especially telling teachers like, hey, they're your problem now. They're in your hands for 8 hours. If you want to fix this issue, you need to fix it. I'll do what I can when I get home. This is very true. So going back to your you learning how to bake and mom teaching you how to use your critical and analytical skills. So how was childhood like for Cheryl?
Well, it depends on who you ask. And I distinctly remember being a child, and I can tell you right now, I've moved 42 times in my life. And no, I wasn't military, and only some of that had to do with being a flight attendant. My dad moved around a lot, and I just picked up that habit and just kept moving. When I was younger, it was very traumatic. I hated moving. I didn't want to move. These were all my best friends. No, please don't take me away from my friends. But for whatever reason, we ended up moving. But that was I look back now, and even though it seemed traumatic at the time, I got exposed to so many different cultures. I grew up in Alaska. I was born in Wyoming. I grew up in Alaska. I've lived in California, Arizona, Texas, Maryland, Virginia. And I think that's all the only places I've lived. But everywhere else, I've visited all 50 states. I've been to, several European countries. And I just love to experience culture. I've learned about different people, what makes people tick, this is interesting, a very eye-opening experience for me was, you get into politics a little bit here, but people are like, oh, we all have to have these little tiny cars that get good gas mileage and we should only travel so many miles a day because we have to save the environment and everything. And I was like, I grew up in Alaska. I grew up in Wyoming. Let me tell you, tell me I can only drive so many miles a day. It takes me 30 miles just to get to school.
30 miles?
Oh, yeah. In Alaska.
By driving?
Yeah, by driving. Yeah. I mean, that was just, Alaska's a big state. Wyoming's a big state.
Yeah.
And then my daughter convinced me to go to Rome with her when she was, in her 20s or something. I was like, I don't want to go to Rome. That doesn't sound very interesting. But man, was I wrong. We won't even go there. I was so wrong. But while we were there, we didn't stay in a hotel. We, rented an Airbnb, kind of a flat, had this little tiny kitchen with a little tiny washer, no dryer, no dishwasher, but this is where it was a place where people lived. This wasn't like an apartment that they rented out to tourists. This was a place where people lived. Every day you took your trash out. Every single day on your way home from work, you stopped and got your groceries at the local, and you walked, and carried your groceries home. And I thought, wow, if I lived like this in Rome, if this is where I lived, I can see, number one, you don't even need a car.
No.
Number two, I can see why they would think that you need to save the planet by, this way. But I'm like, all you people in Rome need to come live in Wyoming or Alaska for a while and find
Why do
out
you think? Why do you think they need to live in Alaska or Wyoming?
so that they can see that their, attempts to try to force these rules on people don't work. They don't work in Wyoming. I mean, I lived in this little what we call a bedroom community that had a grocery store and a little, I don't know, not a Walmart because we were way too small for a Walmart, but, a Walmart type store, a dollar type store. That was pretty much the businesses that existed in my community. If I wanted to go shopping at a Walmart or something, I had to drive 15 to 20 miles to the neighboring community, and that's not a big deal in Wyoming because 15 to 20 miles is nothing in Wyoming. But that's the thing is people don't understand and I feel so blessed that when I grew up, I was exposed to I grew up in California. I didn't grow up in California. I spent some of my youth in California and my teenage years in California. So I knew what it was like to live in a big city. I knew what it was like to experience all that. But I also knew what it was like to live in very rural, very remote areas. I knew what it was like to live in, I hate to categorize liberal, conservative, I knew it's so helpful because I think so often, and goes back to education, we live in a bubble. And if all we know is this little community we were raised in, this school we went to, and this type of thing, we have no idea how the rest of the world lives. And when we go to, kind of going back to my constitutional things, that's what I tell people is, when you make laws, you need to take all people into consideration, not just quote the majority, because the majority rules. Okay, so California and New York are going to rule the country because that's where your major population centers are, and Chicago. They're going to make all the rules for the rest of us because that's where the majority lives.
I can see that. I can see why. I can see that. But I also believe that a lot of people would rather live where they are comfortable. They don't, if they've stepped outside their comfort zone and visited America or visited any other country or city, they're like, you know what, I prefer to live where I want to live because it's much more easier and simple. Like for you, when you went over to Rome, I've been to Italy. I went to Milan and I noticed, for me, it was nothing because I was able to hop on a train, and go see the Duomo and then, walk around. I don't mind it because I'm from a city where I'm public transportation. I'm walking all the time. So to me, it didn't bother me. I don't want to say it bothered me, but to me, it was just like, oh, okay, this is nothing. Like I could actually live in Milan. I can actually enjoy it, but I have not stepped outside of Milan, in terms of like going to Rome or Venice, or Venice or anything like that. But I have, experienced I did have some experience in rural areas within Illinois, and life is definitely different, as you say. It's completely different. But it's just, I believe it kind of works with the person's comfortability. Wherever they feel comfortable, that's where they're going to go.
Well,
you know what I mean?
To me, that's the beauty of where we live. If you want to live, I lived in Montreal for 3 months just recently before COVID, and I had no car. I walked to the grocery store. I walked to work. And when there were places that I wanted to go that were farther away, that weren't within walking distance, and Montreal's cold, kind of like Chicago, I rode public transportation. I didn't want a car when I was there. I had no need for a car. I could get I went to my dance lessons. I did everything. I walked everywhere. And I mean, sometimes it would be poor. I remember times coming home and being just soaked from head to toe because it had rained so hard while I was walking, But even then I was like, well, that's, but I didn't want a car. I didn't want a car when I lived there. And that's what I tell people is the most important thing I think I took away from all of the moving around all these different places is let people live the way they want to live.
Yeah.
as long as they're not hurting anyone else. But when it comes to making all of these rules and regulations and laws, it's really hard because you have to take these people in Wyoming who, you know, you take a car away from somebody in Wyoming, you don't go anywhere. You
Yeah,
don't.
because 30 miles, 15, 20, 30 miles is a long walk. It's
Yeah.
a long walk.
And it's cold in the winter. It's like Chicago. It's
And
windy
I
and cold.
and I bet I'm sure they don't I don't know. I don't know if they have like snow trucks, snow plows happening every now and then. You're probably doing it yourself. So who
Yeah.
would want to do all of that? Yeah. Yeah, if you take it, it's the same. I used to live in Georgia. I used to live in Atlanta, but
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Atlanta, but I lived in a part of, what was it, the north side of Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
where public transportation was readily available and accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And where I lived about 15, 20 minutes away from downtown Atlanta, which was nothing but an Uber or Lyft ride away.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want a car when I was in Atlanta. I was like, grocery
Yeah.
store is literally 10 feet away.
Yeah.
If I want to, take a trip or go somewhere, I can just hop on the train. The train leads me straight into the airport. And the train station was literally a 7-10 minute walk from my place. Like, I was in a really good location to where I'm like, I don't need a car because
Yeah.
they're gonna make me pay $100 something a month just for me to park my car when I can just get on Uber or
Yes.
a Lyft and spend like maybe $10 to $20, both ways.
Well, and
So
you
I
have,
get it.
yeah, you have insurance, you have gas, you have car payment, you have all that. And it's like, I totally get it. If I lived in certain locations, I wouldn't have a car. And I know people think this is crazy, but this was a long time ago. So I guess I won't get in too much trouble. I learned to drive when I was 14. I was driving
Oh wow.
independently by myself. My parents would send me to the grocery store to buy groceries when I was 14. And yes, it was still, you were supposed to be 16 to
I
drive.
think that's kind of common back in the day. A lot of kids were able to like drive. They were able to go to the store, pick up beer, like alcohol and cigarettes for their parents with a note.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that was pretty common around
Yeah.
back then.
Well, it was funny because, my own kids, who are like a whole generation away, people used to laugh in this small, because they, for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, they grew up in Wyoming. That was part of when they were, 7, 8, 9, 10, right in that range. And because my husband was blind, I had to drive everywhere. And I was like, I hate driving. And I've always hated going to the store. I don't like the grocery store. I don't like clothes shopping. I don't like any kind of shopping. I hate shopping. I know, I'm weird. But so, and I was always so busy because I had 4 kids. I had this blind husband. We were trying to start this business and I was swamped all the time. So it was only probably maybe a 10 to 15 minute walk to the grocery store. So I would give my kids their little wagon and I would write them a check or, sign a check, a blank check basically. And when my kids were 8 and 9 years old, they went grocery shopping and I trusted them. They knew the math well enough. It's like, okay, these are some of the things we need. And this is how much money you have to spend. And of course, I always let them get a little treat for themselves just because, that's what you do. But my kids also loved reading. And it was literally, I don't even know how many miles away it was to the library, but they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They'd take their little wagon, my 2 daughters, and pack a lunch because it took the whole day to walk to the library and come back.
Wow.
So they would walk to the library. Well, of course, they spent, an hour or two at the library and they'd come home with a whole wagon full of books, and, and like I said, they'd pack their lunch. They'd stop and have, a little picnic on the way. And it was like this big adventure. Like once a month, they went to the library. And although they didn't have the same freedoms that I had growing up, simply because, the world changes. It's not always safe, even in small town Wyoming. Got to be careful. When I grew up, Mom, I'm going to so-and-so's house. Okay, but if you go to somebody else's house, you call me. and we're like, yeah, and we didn't always do that. I remember if I got in trouble over and over for the same thing, it was because we went to somebody's house, then we went to somebody else's house, and then we went to somebody else's house, and I'd be gone the whole day, and who knows what we were doing. I loved Barbies. My best friend loved Barbies, and we had this massive amount of Barbies and Barbie furniture and Barbie clothes and Barbie everything. We'd set up the whole living room, in Barbie stuff. And I don't know, then we'd go play basketball, or then we would, we used to build forts all the time. In Alaska, there's lots of trees. So we would build these forts. And I remember we had a little, that's how old I am, but 45 records, those little small records.
Yeah.
I had a little tiny battery operated record player. We had a whole stack of 45s. We had, magazines that our parents, from floating around the house, and we would go, and some boys had magazines they probably shouldn't have had, but, in your forts, and we would build these forts. We would build them from the ground up, and then we would, find old scraps of carpet and things. And I don't know, one of our favorite things to do was we built a swing. You had to climb the ladder. We made a ladder that went up a tree, and then we had a platform, and there was this big mud puddle underneath of it. So the object was to swing far enough that you didn't, land in the mud puddle. And of course, we landed in the mud puddle more than our share of times, but you know what I mean? I mean, these are all things we did, and our parents weren't there telling us how to do them.
Yeah.
We were just figuring it out. You know how many times we had to build that ladder so that it actually stuck to the tree and we didn't, fall down off the tree. And if we did and broke our arm or something, our parents weren't mortified, like, oh, you're never doing that again. It's like, oh, here we go, off to the doctor again.
Well, it sounds like you had a very eventful childhood. You were able to explore, you were able to go and do things by yourself, and it translated into your children, where they were able to explore and to go do things by themselves together as well. So that sounds like a pretty dope childhood. I would have loved to explore certain things and do things by myself. Well, I will say my mom did send me to the store at a young age as well. She did send me to the store to do all that stuff, buy groceries. Here's the budget. Here's the debit card. Here's what you need to do. So I learned that fairly early in my childhood as well. So I can kind of relate a little bit to that, to what you did with your kids. That's a dope. I have to, I've never been to Wyoming, never been to Cali, but I think I might, venture out and see what Wyoming is all about. I hope they've updated and put more stores and stuff a little bit closer versus it's still the same.
Oh, well, it depends. If you go to the bigger cities, the town I was from had about 10,000 people. We'd go to Rock Springs, was the big city, and it had probably 25,000 people, but it had lots of stores, hotels, restaurants, the whole thing. If you're like Evanston was probably about the same size as Green River, where I was from, but it was right on the border. And so and it was right on Interstate 80. So you got a lot of, traffic, tourists. They had more business type things. It just depends on where you go. And you can go to Jackson Hole, which that's the big tourist trap, and it's probably one of the most expensive places in the country. And if you go to Jackson Hole, you're not going to Wyoming. That's not representative of Wyoming.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous.
All right. But I'll keep that in mind. But before we go, I do want to ask, what's it like being married to a blind person? I want to know, is your husband completely blind? Because I know someone that is blind, but if they turn in their peripheral, they can see you, but full on face on, they cannot. So I'm wondering, is that your husband the same way, or is he just 100% blind?
Well, he could see for 19 years of his life, and he's passed on. So I feel somewhat comfortable sharing this.
My condolences. I'm sorry.
Well, we got divorced before he passed on, but all that aside, when he was 19 years old, he put a gun to his head, but he wasn't trying to kill himself. It wasn't suicide. He was playing Russian roulette with a little 22, and it severed one optic nerve, and the bullet was lodged in his other optic nerve. So he could see a little bit out of one eye, kind of like you said. If he turned his head, he could, he had what was called 20 over 1200 vision, and it was all peripheral. But
Yeah.
he was extraordinarily, and when I say extraordinarily adventurous, I mean extraordinarily adventurous. He downhill skied, he rode bicycles, he,
Even with his blindness?
And there are actually programs out there for people that are blind. Now, mind you, he had to wear this fluorescent pink bib that said blind skier, and I had to wear the fluorescent pink bib that said blind skier guide. And you never want me to be your guide, I can tell you that. I'm the worst person. There are many times I guided him into a ditch or, whatever, into a creek or something. But he was very adventurous and very good natured. Even though he'd lost his sight, he was very good natured. And he just never let his blindness hold him back.
Yeah.
Now, mind you, I wouldn't say he never drove, because there were occasions where we let him drive in Wyoming out in the middle of, but, he couldn't legally drive. And so that to me was probably the hardest thing, was I had to drive everywhere. And I hated driving. I was just like, I can't do this. And unfortunately, it was because he was so adventurous. One day he was riding his bicycle and he got hit by a semi. And that's how he died. But
my gosh,
everybody's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have let him ride a bike. You shouldn't have let him do that." And first of all, I told people I can't stop him from doing these things. These are things he likes and enjoys. And he always said, and he meant it, he said, "I would rather die living than die, be alive and dead."
Yeah. Yeah. I get what you're saying. Yeah. Wow. That's unfortunate. At least he lived his life. At least he lived his life and, lived it the way that he wanted to live it. I'm so sorry for your loss. That's hard. That's hard. My goodness.
It was tragic. The way he died was tragic. But like I said, I do believe that, thank goodness he was killed instantly and he didn't have to suffer.
Oh, okay.
But, like I said, I think he really, truly lived his life to the fullest. And so I don't think he has any regrets. Let's put it that way.
I don't think so either. It does not sound like he had any regrets. Glad that he lived his life fully. That's good to hear. Well, Cheryl, it was great having you. I enjoyed this conversation. You've enlightened me about different things in terms of education, let's get the word right. Instructional design. I've been seeing that a lot lately with people learning about it and creating curriculums and things like that. So I don't know. I'm not going to tap into it. I might do my own little research, but I have been noticing that much. But thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing the things that you've done, the adventures that you've explored while you were younger, how you allowed your children to explore their mind, their critical and analytical thinking skills and all that other good stuff. I think I might take that and put that in my back pocket for when I have kids. Because I think it's very important for us. I believe throughout our entire life, we need to continue to explore ourselves and constantly think outside of the box and not be so comfortable in our comfort zone. Like, we really need to step out and do the things that we really want to do. So I'm going to take the memory of your ex-husband and put that in the back of my head too, and just live my life regardless, because at any moment, at any time, we could go. But I do thank you for sharing your story and coming on to my podcast. I really, really appreciate it. And before we end, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Follow me on Instagram at Unloaded and Uncovered Podcast. Find, like, and follow the Facebook page Unloaded and Uncovered. And we will see you all next week with another brand new episode. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, have a great evening.